Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with the latest financial news from around New Zealand and around the globe. In this edition, the future of New Zealand's red meat sector. We get the inside oil from an industry expert who wrote that 167-page report critics hope will revolutionize sheep and beef farmers. What to do about Greece as the people protest in the streets about tough austerity measures and the Greek government appoints a new finance minister, the world holds its breath. Will it or won't it default? All this and much, much more coming up. But first, global commodity prices are on a roller coaster this year as confidence in the world economy waxes and wanes. Here to tell us the latest about the markets is ASB's chief economist, Nick Tuffley. Nick, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
Okay, what's happening with global commodities now? It's been quite a year up and down.
Yes, we had started off the year with a lot of bullish sentiment about the global economy. We've seen oil prices skyrocket, silver prices skyrocket, but we've seen quite a number of those commodities pull back quite substantially in recent months. And there's been quite a change in sentiment over the global economy. It's got a lot darker over the last month in terms of the risks that have been coming through. We've had the Japanese earthquake as well, and what that's done to disrupting industrial activity around the world as well. So particularly those hard commodities have been bouncing all over the place. Oil prices down at least 19% off their highs. But our commodity prices seem to have been more stable, so they picked up a bit in the early parts of this year. We haven't seen them soften in anywhere near the same extent.
Let's look big picture now, and of course the market's very skittish still about Greece. What's your latest information about what's going on over there?
Well, it's getting crunch time. The EU is playing hardball. They want to see evidence that Greece is going to commit to further austerity measures.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand they've given them, what, a 2-week deadline. What do you think the outcome is likely to be?
Well, fingers crossed, if the Greeks do in Parliament get their act together, they will pass those measures. They are in a rock and a hard place. If they don't pass these austerity measures, they won't get the next lot of money. They're looking pretty rocky and possibly in need of another big bailout down the track too. And the chances of something like that dim if the Greeks themselves don't look like they're prepared to take action. Yeah,
the Prime Minister, as I understand it, right now is in Parliament trying to persuade the opposition to support him in this. You're going to give us an update before the show is over, I understand.
Fingers crossed, if we can get the line through to Greece and find out what's happening, hopefully we'll have some better information.
Now, how have Asian equities been doing?
Well, we've generally seen markets around the world going through a bit of a roller coaster, and it is linked through to this worries about what's happening in Europe. And the thing is it's contagion is the big fear. So when we have seen the Greek situation getting pretty dire, particularly late last week, we saw equity markets generally weakening. We've seen some recovery in some markets starting to come through this week.
Now, the surprising thing for me is that U.S. shares seem to be doing pretty good, and I can't figure out why.
Well, join the club to an extent. There hasn't been a lot of great news coming out of the US of late, but one thing is that we do seem to be getting a little bit more risk appetite picking up. We're seeing that in the currencies, the euro picking up, in equity markets, particularly in the US, starting to pick up a little bit. So it really just seems to be that really fickle sentiment. The switch gets flicked pretty much every night, but people have been a little bit less bearish over the last few days.
And here at home, of course, there are some small signs that our economy is slowly kickstarting, perhaps. Should we be optimistic?
Let's be cautiously optimistic, but we have seen signs that retail spending has been picking up, including in places like the Waikato, a pretty big rural area. Consumer confidence back up, business confidence back up. Even housing markets start to perk up. So there are some signs that after what was a not very pleasant second half of last year, that things are starting to gain a little bit of momentum. And that earthquake, those earthquakes we should be saying, don't seem to have derailed the economy outside of Canterbury.
Speaking of Waikato doing well in terms of spending, were you at the National Field Days?
Well, I wasn't actually. I was keeping my gumboots clean that week, I have to confess. But it does sound like the mood there has been a bit more upbeat. But again, there's still that element of caution seems to be coming through. So I think a lot of farmers are doing pretty well with meat and dairy prices, but just getting ready to that stage of thinking a bit harder about whether they'll spend some money.
Okay, we'll talk about that after the break. Thanks, Nick. Coming up, my big fat Greek crisis continues to be top of the box office. What's the fallout for the Aussie and Kiwi dollars? China battles devastating seasonal floods with 5 million people affected and at least 171,000 hectares of farmland and crops wiped out. Direct economic losses have reached almost $5 billion. What's it doing to food prices? And the inside view of the red meat sector strategy report from one of its key power players, Bill Falconer. What's it really mean for our sheep and beef farmers and our processors? But first, as we head to break, answer this in our Farmers' Facts and Figures quiz. How many visitors poured through the gates at the 43rd National Field Days? Find out when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, how many visitors poured through the gates at the 43rd National Field Days? The answer, 117,500 visitors, down 4% on 2010. Joining us now is Bill Falconer, chairman of the Investment Advisory Panel of the government's Primary Growth Partnership and chairman of the Meat Industry Association for the past 8 years. Bill, humor me and bear with me for a minute. You're going to hate this, because I think it's important our viewers understand the breadth of your experience and just a few of your skills. You've been a director of Tower Limited, Energy Intellect Limited, and the New Zealand Symphony, and chairman of the Maurice Wilkins Centre of Molecular Biodiscovery at the University of Auckland. And I understand you were recently honored with a fellowship, so congratulations. You've also had successful careers in government, 18 years as a trade negotiator in London, Rome, Washington, and Geneva, ending up as Deputy Secretary of Energy in the 1980s. In the world of business, you've been chief executive of Petrocorp and chaired a wide range of companies in the energy sector, and you've run publicly listed companies too, like St. Luke's Group, Oyster Bay Marlborough Vineyards, Kiwi Fruit International, Restaurant Brands, and Hallaby Holdings, of course. Oh, and just for fun, you've also been the chairman of ACC and the Environmental Risk Management Authority. So you've gotten around a little bit. And you had to look at the red meat sector. Bottom line, what did you discover?
A number of things. First of all, that the poor profitability that was experienced over the last couple of years doesn't have to be here to stay. There's things people can do about it right across the sector to increase that profitability on a sustainable basis and keep the red meat sector as one of the prominent principal drivers of the New Zealand economy.
Of course, now prices are starting to rise. Do you think this has taken farmers, for example, off the boil of wanting to make the changes everybody agrees they need to make?
No, I think what they recognise, I mean, I've been talking to farmer groups up and down the country, what they recognise is that they've now got the opportunity to create a platform against which they can confidently make those changes. It's difficult to make changes when you're in dire straits, but they've now got some economic resilience against which to change.
Now, currently, I think the market's worth, what, $8 billion in exports each year. How much better could it be doing?
We estimate that if everything that we plan to happen happens, then by 2025, exports should be of the order of $14 billion a year.
Okay, so how is it going to happen? Because critics, of course, Nick, you've read the reports as well. Critics say, look, this report is just another paper tiger. I think Damien O'Connor, the Labour spokesperson for agriculture, said $500,000 down the drain. We've heard it all before. Where's the blueprint for action? Nick, is that a fair comment?
Well, I don't know that it was particularly helpful in moving us forward, but I think the one thing the report has identified is a way in which things can go forward, but it does require, I think, a lot more cooperation within the industry is my understanding, and I think that's one of the lessons that we've seen with, say, the success of Fonterra, or even before the merging that created Fonterra, is that there has tended to be that loyalty between the suppliers to particular cooperatives, and that has meant a much smoother environment. And I think what it comes down to is trying to make sure that you're maximising the mutual benefits across sectors that have got some slightly different interests, and having them working together a lot more effectively than they have in the past. Yeah,
because I guess the question, Bill, is what's at stake if the sector doesn't move forward?
Well, let me just say, first of all, Nick's got it right, and Damien missed the point. That's very important to understand. All of the recommendations in this report can only be picked up by people that are in the sector, by farmers and by processors. It doesn't actually, and it's for them to decide, look, we can do this, we can do a bit of that, we can work together here, understand we're going to have to improve relations there. And so you don't need a blueprint to tell them what to do. And I just want to make that point. The cooperation, what we call the alignment between farmer and processor, is extremely important here. Now, what would happen if none of this proceeded? We'll still have a red meat sector, which is extremely important to the New Zealand economy. It's already small. I mean, it's probably half the size it was 20 years ago. It's already small, and it would continue to be so, specialising in its traditional markets, which are high-margin markets. What we're looking for is reinvestment in the sector, which will enable us to take advantage of the growing demand in the emerging markets like China and Indonesia and India.
Correct. Interesting. Reports just come out from Rabobank, one of the other banks, Nick, sorry to raise its name, but they're saying, in effect, it's worth, what, $1 billion a year now to sell emerging markets things like offal, for goodness sakes, things that our people don't eat, but around the world, they love it.
Most people don't know that number 2 market for New Zealand lamb is China. I mean, we always think of Europe and North America and so forth. Number 2 market is China in volume terms. It's number 6 in value terms, because China and the other Asian markets are taking the things which we have not particularly valued, like the offal and like the flaps and like the tripe and the stomach and so forth like that. And the challenge now is to start encouraging them to recognise that there's better product there, higher value product, but a higher margin product for us as well. What we're seeing now is the start of something which will be a lot bigger.
Are you confident that real change is going to come out of your report?
Yes, don't expect it overnight. Changing behaviours, changing patterns of doing business takes time. And what we're doing is we're setting up a monitoring group which will just keep in touch with farmers and processors alike to work out how they're responding to those recommendations. And I am confident, from the feedback that we've had from everybody across the sector, I'm confident that over time you will see change and it will be good.
Okay, good to know. Meantime, according to MAF, most farming sectors apparently have very good times ahead. What can you tell me about that, Nick?
I think in terms of what we'll see on global markets, I think the prices will remain pretty firm over the medium term. We may not see some of the prices we've got at the moment be sustained because we benefit at times from supply issues in other parts of the country. There was just one thing with the MAF report which I think perhaps overstates the benefits we'll see, and that is an assumption that the currency will fall back quite dramatically even whilst commodity prices remain high. So we may find that returns aren't quite as strong as what MAF suggests, because I would imagine if we do have firm commodity prices like that, our currency will not fall back to the extent that they have assumed.
What can we expect in the lamb sector, for example, in the beef sector going forward?
Well, the thing for New Zealand is that there's going to be this ongoing development of other markets, and I think, as Bill mentioned before, the emerging markets are where we're going to be seeing a lot of the growth coming in the world, full stop. And secondly, there's not the same sort of trade protectionism that we tend to run up with agricultural products in those areas too. Now,
except in the US, of course, when it comes to dairy. I mean, there are a lot of trade barriers still in the world for us. I'm very interested, Bill, for your many years sitting doing negotiations around the world. How do you think that we're doing, New Zealand as a country, when it comes to doing trade with the rest of the world?
I think the rest of the world would say we're doing exceptionally well. We're the only country that has a trade agreement with China, for example. We're engaged with Russia. The Prime Minister and Tim Gross are about to go off to India.
Correct, yeah.
And of course there's the TPP negotiations.
Trans-Pacific Partnership, yes, so many acronyms.
which are underway now, and New Zealand has a central role in that. And I think that we're respected for the way in which we approach these things, and we can point to benefits from the agreements that we've concluded thus far.
Is there a danger, though, that we could be completely overtaken by supergiants like China?
I think absolutely, but that's a commercial challenge as much as a as one for the government. In business, we have to find a way of identifying our role in the Chinese market, or indeed in the Indian or the Indonesian markets, so that despite their size, we're in the bit that suits us. We're in the high margin end.
I am interested to see that John Key is off to India. That seems to be something that we haven't been pursuing as aggressively as perhaps we should. We've had stars in our eyes, if you like, over China. Nick, would that be fair comment?
Yes, you're right. There's been a lot of focus on China because it has seemed to be growing fast, but India is a country which over the next couple of decades is going to be growing strongly as well. So from a medium-term point of view, it does provide us with great opportunities, particularly as the demographics are more favourable in India than they are in China long-term. Let's
talk about Greece a little bit now that we have Bill on set with us as well. Bill, what's your take on what's going on over there? I see that the credit rating agencies now have given them a CCC. They are the lowest ranked country in the world now.
I think that we're seeing a bit of a game of chicken going on here between Greece and its lenders, the people that lend to it, the trade-off between the austerity measures on the one hand and the willingness of the bankers to extend their credit. I suppose the world can't allow Greece to fail. Now, failures we've seen before, Nick, are Brazil, Mexico.
Yes, Argentina.
Argentina, where the world has eventually stepped in and said, well, we can't allow this to carry on, and there have been corrective measures of one kind or another. Greece, sitting there inside the European Union, I think is another case, and I have a feeling that somehow or another the financial institutions will find a way of seeing Greece through this crisis.
Yeah, I wonder if the Greek people are going to support the government in taking the tough measures that the rest of the world seems to feel they have to take. The Prime Minister we saw this week put in one of his political rivals as finance minister. How do you think that's going to go down?
Well, he's doing what he needs to do to get agreement within his own government. The challenge Greece has is that the European Union won't release the next tranche of the rescue package that they've put together for Greece until Greece agrees to take further measures. And those measures are unpopular. They have had to make deep cuts to try and get their spending under control. And it is actually punishing the economy quite a lot along the way too.
Yeah, the problem is it's going to be so tough, but are the cuts going to be so deep that they're not going to be able to grow the economy? Isn't that a risk?
Well, it is, but I mean, you've got to think of the alternatives. Any of the alternatives for Greece are tough. If people talk about it exiting the European Monetary Union, refloating the drachma and so forth, the consequences of that for the Greek people would be drastic. And I think it's always going to be, they will always come to the realization that it's better to deal with your crises in a managed way than an unmanaged way. And I've got a feeling that however much they complain at this point, they will follow a government lead to have a managed outcome for the present crisis.
Meantime, the world continues to hold its breath and wait. We're all kind of powerless, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
We are. Somebody else who is powerless right now, the Chinese people. Devastating floods now there, wiping out thousands, tens of thousands of hectares of land. What is the outlook likely to be there in terms of food prices around the world, Nick?
Well, probably the issue will come down to whether the particular foods that have been wiped out are heavily traded and whether China will now be attempting to import some of those foodstuffs. What we do see when we see these weather crises come along, be it Russia and wheat, is that if they are heavily traded, it does tend to start putting a bit of pressure on the global prices for a period for those sorts of crops.
Yeah, food prices, of course, in China are already going up. They've lost an incredible amount of their vegetables and other things. It seems to me as if the whole world has changed now with the changing weather patterns. It ain't the way it used to be even 20 years ago, Bill. Am I right in thinking like that?
It seems that way, doesn't it?
It seems that way.
I think people are hesitant to draw sort of scientific conclusions about this. You need a much longer time frame to see whether or not we're witnessing a trend of change, but it certainly seems that way.
And we have only to look at Christchurch. The aftershocks again today seem to roll on and roll on. That's pushing out the rebuild, and that's not good for the New Zealand economy, Nick.
Well, it could well slow it up, and certainly one thing that businesses and people in Christchurch really want desperately is some sort of certainty in the way forward. And unfortunately, when you get these aftershocks, it does mean that businesses might be a bit slower to rebuild in the central city. But sounds like, at least on the residential front, we'll get some certainty for people there soon, and they'll be able to start planning their lives.
Australian economy, of course, continues to be very strong, and we continue to lose a lot of people to Australia. The latest rates out show that people are leaving our shores at very high rates. Is that a concern for you, Bill?
No, I think the movement both ways across the Tasman has been going on for a long time, and we shouldn't be surprised at what's happening now, and we shouldn't be surprised if in a year or two people start to flow back. And you know, I don't see this as a sort of a great hole in the New Zealand economy.
Ms. Gillard, across the ditch, some suggestion now by political pundits that she could be in trouble. That could be a bit of a blow for us here in New Zealand, couldn't it? She's been a pretty good friend. Your take on it, Nick?
Well, she's obviously just fresh into being Prime Minister, so it will be nice to have a bit of stability to be able to build up those relationships. But I think regardless of whoever is in power in Australia, New Zealand's always going to be working pretty hard to build up that relationship, because it is our single biggest export destination and very, very important to us. Perhaps the other way, not quite so important, but I think at this end we'll always make that effort to improve our relationships with Australia.
Thank you, gentlemen. Stand by. Coming up after the break, Future Proof, what our experts will be tracking over the next 7 days. Wherever they're headed, if you're smart, you'll be riding shotgun. But first, a question for you in our Farmers Facts and Figures quiz. What's National Field Day's worth to the New Zealand economy? The answer when we come back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, what's National Field Day's worth to the New Zealand economy? $600 million. And now it's time for Future Proof. What's coming up that our experts will be watching? What's happening, first of all, over in Athens with that all-important vote?
Well, as we're speaking at the moment, they're in the midst of voting, and it looks very, very tight at the moment as to whether they will pass this austerity package that the EU is looking for. So may or may not go through, so we need to keep watching the events to see what happens. But the Greek government has until about the middle of July to pass these austerity measures, so they may be able to go back and redo it. And if they are able to redo it, then the EU will release them some more money. Yeah, why are we surprised? Nothing's going to be easy over there. Well, it's really tough when you have people rioting in the streets and very much against what's happening. Not all the politicians are going to be lining up voting for it. Bill, let's talk about primary growth partnerships. You're the chairman. This is a new idea that came in not so very long ago. How has business been for you? Are you getting in lots of applications from companies that have great ideas to take us forward? We have. We've received probably over 50 applications. I have to say that we've only recommended a dozen of them for investment, but we've been very happy with the quality of those, and it's established a good relationship between the fund and the primary sector business community as to what might be done in the future. Refresh me, what are some of the exciting projects, the areas that you're actually putting some money into now? We've put some, we've had some very interesting investments in aquaculture, one which is designed to enhance mussel breeding in New Zealand instead of just catching them with, catching the spats through wild capture. We've had some, an exciting investment in revolutionising trawling at sea. We've had some very major investments in the meat sector and in dairy. We've had an exciting small investment in honey. That's been very exciting, and you know, it's been right across the sector. It's early days yet. We haven't done anything significant yet in horticulture, but that's sitting out there. So no, it's been good. How important is the PGPs to moving us forward as an agricultural nation? How critical really is it? What we're trying to do, if you recall, you know, given that agriculture, the primary sector, is critical to the New Zealand economy, the growth in the sector has been from what we describe as innovative and transformational changes in the economy, out of dairy and into kiwi fruit in the Bay of Plenty.
out of dairy and sheep and into viticulture in Hawke's Bay and in Marlborough. And what we're looking for is people who have got these innovative ideas which will change the face of the primary sector and generate significant economic gains for the New Zealand economy. So we're looking for ideas which are market-led. We say somebody have to see the market opportunity. These are the hurdles I've got to jump in order to get there. I'm willing to invest myself to jump those hurdles, and if we see the risks as worth taking, then we'll establish the partnership and invest with them. So it's an exciting program, and it's all about sort of trying to move the primary sector forward so that it continues to be the mainstay of the New Zealand economy.
Nick, anything in particular you're going to be watching over the next 7 days?
I think just quickly keep an eye on what's happening with the US. They've got until 2nd of August to vote for a new debt ceiling, or else they have to figure out a way to stop paying some bills. So watching out for some agreement amongst the politicians will be a pretty key thing over there.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks to my guests, Nick Tuffley and Bill Falconer. We love to hear your feedback, so be sure to check out the website. Keep the faith. See you next time.